manager! To the manager! We're here at the Bank Republic! Deliver a letter! To the manager! Demanding that Gaffney sign on to the Bangladesh Fire and Safety Accord! So dear manager, wherever you are, would you please come out to speak with us? Would you please come out to speak with us?
So glad we started tonight with that video. I want to start with kind of a poll about the global market. Does anyone sitting here know where your shirt was manufactured? And to help you, you could ask the person sitting behind you to please lean over and tell you what's on the tag, if you don't mind. Okay. All right, so let's hear a few.
China.
Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, India, Cambodia, Costa Rica. Where? Hong Kong. Mine is Indonesia. And the genes in Pakistan. Dominican Republic. Thailand. So really, what does this mean? The least developed countries, these are all countries impoverished by a colonial past and where workers are earning less than $100 a month and down to $40 a month in Bangladesh, where there's now 5,000 factories employing about 3 million garment workers. Now, the corporate media, they always present these as thousands of small factories where goods are produced and tens of thousands of petty capitalists employing millions of desperate semi-skilled workers. And the big brand names claim that they just put out the designs and ask for bids. And they don't have any control over the pay scales or the working conditions or fire safety or building safety or pay or equipment. Now, in Bangladesh, when the worst industrial accident in history happened just last month, more than 1,127 people died. Every brand name in clothing issued statements saying that they had nothing to do with the collapse of this building, and as a matter of fact, no goods of theirs were made in the building. The response, though, in Bangladesh was that millions, and as we just saw in this video, millions and millions of workers turned out, both in Dhaka and across Bangladesh, in big demonstrations demanding some control and regulation and safety and unionization. It was huge what happened here, what happened in Bangladesh. And several global union federations also stepped up with a campaign to require companies to participate in and fund a minimal program of independent safety inspections, basic checks for chemicals, fumes, poor ventilation, safety exits. And there was a call to sign the agreement called the Bangladesh Accord to improve worker safety in Bangladesh. And every company doing business in Bangladesh refused to sign. So finally, after a global campaign of advertisements, internet petitions, rallies, and pickets all over Europe, H&M Group agreed to sign because the international pressure had become for them a public relations fiasco. Who's H&M Group? It's a Swedish retail owner of 6 global clothing chains, operates in 43 countries, has 2,629 stores, and it's the largest buyer of clothes from Bangladesh. Second largest clothing retailer, right up there with Walmart and Target and The Gap, which also operates under the brands Banana Republic and Old Navy. And what became too embarrassing for H&M Group was that workers earning $40 a month were being compared to the CEO billionaire Pearson, whose earnings were $384 million a year. That's, I don't know, probably more than $40 a second. So after holding out for quite some time, he alone is worth $18 billion. H&M Group finally agreed to pay $640,000 into a fund to upgrade safety in Bangladesh. Such a paltry amount. It's not even $1 million a year that was committed by this giant conglomerate that sold $22 billion in clothing last year on the world market. Now, why did they hold out so long? Why did no other corporation sign? Because it was a legally binding contract. And The Gap and Walmart and Target are all opposed to any legal liability or commitment. They all committed to increasing their charitable donations. They would fund safety, education, and so on. But they refuse to be bound by any form of regulation. So just to say, by the way, that next Thursday there's another action like what we saw in the video, and I do want to join you. You go right into the stores and have a mic check and in the streets, and the response is great. And then on Saturday, June 22nd, there's going to be a sizable action here in New York where we're really going to take it to the big stores. But so this is an important action of internationalism in talking about a global market. Now, this determination to target and utterly destroy every form of restraint that the workers have won in past years on a global scale, that's what's going on today. When you look at the city of Detroit, put into receivership, where every union contract is on the line, to have the right to just rip it up, along with the schools and shutting down the hospitals and the social services, it's all now in receivership. It's all part of breaking the unions under the claim of austerity. It's no different than what's going on in Greece, in Italy, in Cyprus. The very man in charge of putting Detroit into receivership carried it out for the auto union contract. GM workers suddenly making half the pay. That's the contract. Same thing happening, postal contracts, pensions. A pension is a contract made with the workers. Now, we don't have to convince anyone here that it's a global economy and that monopolies rule. Just want to say how it's changed even from when Lenin first described this as a system and explained that capitalism had grown and matured. This was the monopoly stage of capitalism. That's how he explained what imperialism was. But the figures that he was using were talking about iron and steel and the railroads. Since that time, even the food we eat and agribusiness, look at Monsanto and Cargill and Kellogg and Kraft and Nestle's and Coca-Cola. These are the big food corporations. We could look at the clothes we wear, which we just did, Gap and Walmart and H&M Group and Target. We could look at the communication and tech companies, Time Warner, Intel, Dell, AT&T, Verizon, Apple. Even the social services that are provided, health insurance companies, it's all big corporations and monopolies. United Healthcare, Kaiser, Aetna, Humana. The pharmaceutical companies, Johnson & Johnson, Pfizer, Roche. And then there are the really big gas and oil corporations that have so much at stake, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, and the military corporations. That we could spend a lot of time on, but just to mention GE and United Technology and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and Lockheed Martin, these are the biggest government contractors employing more than 100,000 workers each. And they draw the overwhelming majority of their revenue from guaranteed government contracts for war, for weapons, for the military. They have a big stake in war. And none of these corporations, none of these big monopolies, and they're all interlinked and operate under lots and lots of other brand names, could exist for a minute without what are now called the super banks. In the U.S., it's J.P. Morgan and Bank of America, Citibank, Goldman Sachs. In Europe, we have the Deutsche Bank in Germany and HSBC in Britain and BNP in France and so on. The interlocking ownership, and it's a real dictatorship by the banks who are the real power. And any corporation looking for any kind of a loan or credit only gets it if they can guarantee they're going to make a profit, no matter how ruthless. That's the system. It's not a policy, it's not a mistake, it's the way the whole system functions. There's free trade agreements, which many of us here know a great deal about, what NAFTA did, what the Central America Free Trade Agreement did, the World Trade Organization. A new trade agreement to be signed in October will go even further, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the TPP, which will prohibit any regulation by any company doing business on Wall Street. And actually, companies will owe compensation if they pass environmental regulations that cost companies. I mean, this is the kind of thing put through in the name of free trade. And that is the kind of regulation that the big monopolies want to see. No protection for workers and complete guarantee of their profits. Now, I'm raising all of this because it really is to motivate why we need and are determined to study and restudy Lenin. And Larry Holmes made a proposal to us really in the past month that we really in this it be the 90th anniversary of the death of Lenin, take up a real study both of Lenin's imperialism, Lenin on the national question, and Lenin on the need for a revolutionary workers' party. And you could spend a lot of time studying Lenin. But since tonight we're talking about imperialism, the monopoly stage of capitalism, and we're going to do a lot more on next Thursday's class, but Lenin explained bank capital and industrial capital and the monopolies becoming global, and this being a continuation of capitalist development, that it's no longer free competition, it's now all a few monopolies. And especially, he explained the monopolies, these cartels merging with the banks. And I just want to touch on, because we're not going to have a lot of time, these features he described, sort of the basic features of imperialism, because right away you can see it in the world in which we live and things that we take for granted, we now understand or see all around us. But this concentration of production and capital is developed to such a high stage that it creates monopolies, which play the decisive role in economic life. Well, that's certainly true today. You can't find a mom and pop store anymore. And nothing is produced that we use or eat or wear. The merging of bank capital with industrial capital and a financial oligarchy, and the export of capital as distinguished from the export of commodities. That's certainly true when you look at the world today. The formation of international monopoly capital associations which share the world among themselves. And that's true whether it's clothing or internet or military equipment or gas and oil. It's all deals. And it's a territorial division of the whole world where the biggest capitalist corporations compete, and they compete ruthlessly. And in this process, they need war. They thrive on war, and they use every form of economic, political and military war. So, and the other very interesting thing about Lenin in writing this is, see, he's carrying on a polemic with what was really a reformist of his day, Karl Kautsky, who was saying this is really a bad policy, and that the workers' demands could make changes and reform capitalism to be better to the workers. And really Lenin was taking the position, no, it's the entire system, and that's what has to be destroyed. Now, the other very important point that Lenin makes, and this is where I want to, because I want to really start talking about the countries today, but he described a world divided into oppressor and oppressed nations. And in this little pamphlet on imperialism, he said that the struggle of the semi-colonial and colonial countries is no longer, in most cases, against feudalism. It's against imperialism. And under imperialism, the division of nations into oppressing and oppressed is a fundamental, most important, and inevitable fact. Now, we are for the revolutionary struggle of the workers everywhere in the world. We are also for defending our class everywhere it's under attack. And I raise this because we see ourselves as a combat organization for our class. Now, there are few areas where there's bigger confusion, so I want to start just by talking for a minute about the war in Syria, where there's big confusion. There's been a war underway for the past 2 years that has seen the destruction of the beautiful, modern cities of Syria. And Syria was really a very beautiful, highly developed. There are groups in the political movement in the U.S. that say that there's no U.S. war going on in Syria. This is a civil war only. It's an uprising against a repressive regime. And they cite all their grievances with Bashar Assad and his government. And also say, well, actually the U.S. has only supplied $60 million in some night vision goggles. And that's the extent of it. Now, that, of course, ignores the safe havens and the bases in Turkey. What's Turkey? That's a NATO member, the U.S. commanded military alliance for 60 years. So the bases for this opposition are right in Turkey. The weapons are funneled through Qatar. That's so interesting, see, because Qatar doesn't have a military. So all these weapons are supposedly coming from the Qatar military. The total size of the Qatar military, it's more like there's an 11,000 member police force and honor guard in Qatar. That's it. It's supplied by the U.S. government. And there's a huge air base in Qatar. So, but that's where the weapons are coming from. They're coming from Qatar, and that gives the U.S. A view that they're hands-off in this. There's U.S. special forces that are based in Jordan that are training someone. They're doing something there, but they've just set up quite an operation in Jordan. And then there's a diplomatic and political support for the Free Syrian Army and the Syrian National Coalition, which just happens to be headed by a U.S. citizen. And there's the funneling and the paying of thousands and thousands of mercenaries and contractors, many of them actually hired directly from Libya, where they had just played a role in pulling down the regime in Libya. And then, of course, while saying there's no U.S. involvement, you look at Israel, who, with the backing of the Obama administration, carried out a major bombing of Syria. Israel received $4 billion just this year from the U.S. It's the largest recipient of foreign aid, and it acts as a proxy and an extension of U.S. military power. Now, I raise all of this because we do need to be oriented on Syria, because this could very quickly become a much wider and far more dangerous war. There's a lot at stake. Today, Secretary of State Kerry denounced the Russian military for saying that they would provide S-300 anti-aircraft. This is an advanced air defense system to Syria. And the Secretary of Defense, after all that the U.S. is providing to the Contras, said that this would hurt Israel's strategic interests, because, of course, Israel already has an equal and even more powerful. Now, Russia didn't back down. They responded by saying they're going to go ahead also with their sale of MiG fighters to the Syrian army. So there is a real and a dangerous showdown and an escalation that is happening. Hezbollah in Lebanon, who was really the force who liberated Lebanon from Israeli occupation and played an enormous role in doing so, also weighed in, and they said they were going to clear the Syrian reactionary forces out of the sort of the northwest corner of Lebanon, right on the Syrian border. And they've done that. They've done it just this week. And that's a big, also a big setback for the U.S. and everything they were trying to do. And then there's all the differences within this coalition that the U.S. military power has tried to put together. So there's a lot at stake. There's a lot at stake in another way if the U.S. is able to carry out regime change in Syria, because this is a country that had free education, including university, including medical school. I was just speaking to a Syrian doctor yesterday who was describing the levels of the health standards, the highest. Free health care for all, including 2 million Iraqi refugees from the U.S. occupation of Iraq. As soon as they entered into Syria, they had free health care. And the 500,000 Palestinian refugees who live in Syria have always had free education, subsidized housing, free health care. Syria is important for another reason, and this is why the U.S. is especially targeting them now. There's major pipelines that are coming through Syria that would bring Iranian oil into the Mediterranean and into Europe, and there's a determination to shut down those pipelines. It's part of the war on Iran. And it's well known that really the war on Syria is part of the war on Iran. It's a war for the reconquest of the entire region. The other thing that's at stake, about 23% of Syria's government revenue, the way in which they've built the free housing and education and health care, comes from oil revenue. And half of that oil is in the hands of the government. In order to get investment, they've privatized some of it. The big thing that they've also kept on the books the laws that restrict these super exploitative business practices, like you see in Bangladesh. And they've opposed the total privatization of whole parts of their industry and banking. So that's why they're targeted. We could look at Libya, and I just want to sort of jump through some of this quickly because we'll have more time at the class to go through it. But Libya was able to survive 7 months of U.S. NATO bombing before finally Gaddafi was assassinated and the government was literally torn down. Now, during that whole time, there were groups in the U.S. who were part of the progressive movement that said, this isn't really a U.S. war. They could tell you every grievance they had against Gaddafi, and there was a resistance going on that they were in support of, and so on. It's why it's important to know and take sides on what is happening in a U.S. war. Here was a country that had the highest standard of living in Africa. Free education, free health care for all, including migrant workers from all over Africa, all made possible by nationalized gas and oil. And what's happened since the fall of the government in Libya? There's no government whatsoever. The U.S. and the Italians and the Germans and the British, they don't have to sign a contract with anyone. But the oil keeps pumping from these big platforms just off the coast. The cities lie in ruins. There is no rebuilding going on. And the more than $110 billion that Libya had in cash reserves that they were going to use for a banking and currency system for all of Africa, the U.S. simply confiscated it to pay for their bombing campaign. They simply pocketed it. And today, U.S. forces as AFRICOM are in 35 countries in Africa. So that's what the defeat, that's what the crushing, the tearing down of Libya meant. It's important also to raise this, to look at what's at stake in Venezuela, in Bolivia, in Ecuador today, and all the ALBA countries, because there's an effort by the U.S. to turn around what were very important revolutionary developments. And these popularly elected governments have come into power and been able to hold on despite U.S. CIA orchestrated coups. We saw what a U.S. coup did in Honduras in overturning Zelaya in 2009, what happened in Haiti with the overturn of Aristide in 2004. Now, unfortunately, there are left forces in the U.S. who say, well, these governments are simply dictatorships, and that has actually ended up with them siding with those who supported a police coup in Ecuador. And I give that as one example, demanding that the movement join them in supporting those targeted by, they say, simply a repressive regime. But what happened in Ecuador? It's like what happened in Venezuela. There was an all-out coup effort by the CIA to overturn a popularly elected government. The police seized airport, TV stations, mass communication, and so on. And some forces immediately jumped into the streets to side with that coup. So at this point, and I raise this to call Correa of Ecuador or Evo Morales of Bolivia or Hugo Chavez in Venezuela dictators, especially they came into office, every single one of them, on popular, progressive elections, right? And to distort this into it's just a struggle of bosses and workers in the simplistic terms, the real question is, what side are you on in a struggle against U.S. imperialism? That's the issue. That's the issue. And it's why U.S. imperialism is so determined to overturn these popular, progressive governments. Does the U.S. just have a misunderstanding with Venezuela? Do they just have a misunderstanding with Bolivia or Ecuador? I don't think so. They want to do in every one of the ALBA countries what they're doing right now in Syria and what they did to Libya and what they did to Iraq. They want to pull it down and destroy it. Now, there are people who get confused in every struggle, and we want to talk to them and talk to them again and again. We want to be patient because we want to explain that U.S. wars take many, many forms. But here in the center of U.S. imperialism, we can't be neutral in the class struggle. We do consider ourselves to be a combat organization determined to organize and give political leadership to movements of workers and oppressed. And that does mean taking sides in every picket line, in every strike, in every war. There is a relentless push to do away with every form of regulation, agreement, and contract. We know where we stand, whether it's a union fighting for its life in Detroit, whether it's auto or postal workers. We know that the FBI and the CIA aren't going to be reformed, and that drone strikes aren't going to end. A little publicity on them may cut down, but they're not going to end. And every part of this is our mooring, it's our anchor. It's why Lenin is important to us. Now, I really just want to end on that because I think there's so much more we could take up in the discussion, but to say in this little video that when we act in defense of workers anywhere in the world, we strengthen the working class struggle here. That's what internationalism and solidarity is all about. It's why it's so important. It's so important to both take sides and to do so in a way that mobilizes others. It's also essential to know long range, really what we want to do. And this is something that Sam Marcy, the founder of our party, put so much attention into explaining again and again, we are for the defeat of U.S. imperialism, the overturn, the end to capitalist rule, being conscious on that, being focused on that, and doing everything we can to both, that's what revolutionary defeatism is. And there are opportunities that come only in the midst of terrible crises, when workers feel they have no options. Sam always used to say, look, the revolutionary upsurge that swept Russia, it didn't only sweep Russia at the end of World War I, it swept every country in Europe. Why did it result in a revolution that succeeded nowhere else in Europe? And it's because in Russia there was a party that was determined. And that determination is everything. So for tonight, I hope many people turn out in the coming days for this important struggle, because every time the workers in Bangladesh get an agreement, and every time the workers in Syria push back a U.S. NATO offensive, or the workers in Ecuador or Venezuela or Bolivia or Haiti push back a U.S. coup, and every strike that workers win here, every time the police finally gets charged with the murder of a youth, these are gains for our struggle, and it's how we win and grow stronger. Thank you.